Hello, everyone. Welcome to our first episode of DeskTalks, where we'll be discussing latest trends in market research and consulting. Today, we're excited to have Gautham from IBM Consulting with an impressive background in healthcare and consulting vertical on senior executive roles at Cognizant, Bering. He's also been a baseball coach for an independent team a few years ago. Gautam wears a lot of hats, and we're about to get some really interesting discussions, especially around how generative AI is changing the game in consulting and market research. But rather than me telling you all about him, I'll let Gautam introduce himself. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Omer, and thanks for having me. First and foremost, before I go into it, the views that I express today are mine and not necessarily those of my employer. Having said that, my current role that I am in is a partner in IBM Consulting within our data and technology transformation practice, focusing mainly on life sciences and healthcare. And really, some of the goals that I have in working with some of our C level clients is to go ahead and identify opportunities where generative AI and now more recently, agentic AI can go ahead and uncover opportunities for revenue growth, as well as look at doing processes internally much more efficiently and effectively.
So that's great. You have a great experience in digital transformation and with agentic AI and consulting. I was curious. You have been at the forefront of digital transformation. Have you seen the newer types of AI, generative AI and agentic AI, shifting the landscape in consulting, especially within market research? What's the biggest change you've personally witnessed in how consultants operate?
Well, let's first just mention, this is some of the most exciting times that I've had in the 25 plus years of my career, especially in analytics and AI right now. And just to kind of level set on some terms, when people talk about generative AI, I like to think of it as much more of a reactive sort of way of interacting with AI, where you go ahead and provide a command or a prompt to either do one of three basic types of capabilities: content summarization, content extraction, or content creation. You're really giving some sort of command or prompt again to do that in some sort of fashion. Now, with agentic AI, which a lot of people are talking about and getting excited, it's really a proactive way of interacting. And what do I mean by that? You give it an objective, and it's almost like you say, go. After you give it that objective, it goes ahead and, based on all of the intelligence and information that you connect to it, it makes decisions on your behalf to say what should be the actions that are taken. Now, let's talk about this in market research a little bit more. When I talk about that in market research, traditionally, if you think about it, many different people, and especially our analysts, you would go ahead and traditionally and ask them, produce me a report on what's the performance of products over a certain amount of time. And traditionally, people would use different sort of technologies or programming language such as Python or even SAS to really get all the data together. And after getting that data, then summarize it. There's a lot of manual steps that were taking place. Now, with generative I could go ahead and have analysts type in some prompts, and it goes ahead and picks up all the essential information that you need in order to summarize it in a report. You cut down a lot of time in doing that versus having someone have to prepare that on a routine basis. Now let's talk about how that's going to change even further with agentic AI. With agentic AI, if you go ahead and give it an objective to say, go ahead and run this report for me in an automated fashion on certain basis, it will go ahead and reproduce it for you and also give you analysis on it. So this is truly in an automated fashion. Now, there are still a lot of steps that need to happen for an organization to be fully comfortable with it, but that is the journey that organizations will take, and this is the trend of where things are going.
And when we are talking about the consulting processes, do you think we're heading towards a reinvention of traditional consulting roles? Or is it more like about augmentation AI working hand in hand with human expertise?
So I see it as augmentation. And what I see happening is some of these lower value activities that I just talked about really going ahead and preparing the data and information and pulling it, that's going to be less of the role of some of the analysts. And what's going to happen is they're going to focus more on strategy and more of those strategic sort of standpoints instead of working many hours to prepare the information. So I really see a lot of our consulting colleagues spending a lot more time on learning how to really analyze and validate the information versus preparing the information. Now, this has been said for a while, but I think it's a lot more possible now since generative AI and agentic AI are getting a lot more into the space and getting a lot more interest out there by organizations, especially a lot of your C suites. So, this is why I think it's going to really be much more pervasive than what you might have seen in the past.
Right, and we're talking about the human intuition, and this is a kind of a topic that's been very, popular in the last few months. AI can crunch numbers at lightning speed, but market research often hinges on intuition and context. So, how do we strike that right balance between machine-driven insights and human perspective? Are the areas where human judgment still reigns supreme?
Yes, I think some of the areas, and as it specifically pertains to market research, is how observational is the study that you're doing? And what do I mean by that? Let me give you a couple examples here. The first example is when you're doing message testing to find out how are your target audience, especially like in biopharmaceuticals and life sciences, either your patients, your HCPs, or your payers. How are they reacting to some of the messaging that you have? And yeah, you could use techniques as computer vision and sentiment analysis to kind of look at that, but there's all that knowledge that a lot of times, your moderators and your experts that go ahead and do this process need to go ahead and analyze how they react to the messages, how they react to the creative elements of what you're looking for your potential advertisements and promotional materials. A lot of that you need to look and have that dialogue. And many people have unteam number of years of experience in a category or a therapeutic area in effort to kind of draw out to really ask those questions. Does this resonate or does this not resonate? So that's just one example. The other example is in ethnographic studies, where you go ahead and follow a person or a target group for a period of time and really observe their behaviors and activities. And a lot of times you do this to really have a better understanding of what your target audience goes through on a daily basis. So, for example, if you look at a certain disease condition, where are the problem points that a person, that target patient might have when going ahead and contending with that disease? That's where a lot of your message testing will come later to say, well, our therapeutic is going ahead and addressing this problem point. How do does this message resonate in terms of that? And will that go ahead and help you address the issue at hand? So those are a couple examples, I believe, where you still have human generated insights because they're more observational in nature. And I think AI certainly can do that, but it's still a good amount of progression that is required before it can do that as well as a human.
Right. And from your experience working with these clients, like how have the new types of AI may revealed an insight or opportunity that might have gone unnoticed using traditional methods?
So right now, I think at the current time that we are talking, it's more about speed to insight versus insights being unnoticed at this time. And what I see is this, avoiding some of the human errors that you might have in the process, because, again, it's a machine and you give it some certain parameters, it's going to go ahead and do that. From a human perspective, we ultimately would love to be our best on a daily basis. But there's sometimes, once in a while, we might miss something when we're doing something and a certain activity. So those are some instances that, where this is going to go ahead and complement and say, oh yeah, that's something that I should have looked at because this is what AI has uncovered for me. And this is where I see it going hand in hand, really giving ideas to make sure that you're capturing things correctly and you're doing it with a good speed and rigor. Again, as I was just mentioning before, what we're seeing is more of a strategic sort of orientation that our consultants have to get to versus just kind of packaging, preparing, and running sort of models and analysis in effort to go ahead and eventually get to insight generation.
So I get to hear this a lot, like AI tools in decision making and smarter strategies. So AI is becoming a trusted partner in decision making. So how are consultants today leveraging generative AI and agentic AI to help clients move forward and faster in making strategic calls? Like, what changes do you see in how this involves in the next few years?
So right now, what people are doing is doing more of what is called the context search, where you would have disparate sets of data that would be amongst different systems, where I'm able to pull that all together and have an interface where I ask questions or prompts. And that is a way of efficiently bringing together information and data. And again, traditionally, you would have to use different programming language such as SAS, Python, even SPSS to kind of do a lot of that. And you're avoiding a lot of that now, where you're through generative AI and a lot of the backend integrations, you're able to bring that and do these kind of searches. So that is one thing. The next thing that I'm also seeing is in terms of just some of the basic sales data and promotional data. What is happening and writing those inquiries rather than going ahead and manually searching for a lot of these factoids through sort of generative AI. Agentic AI is still kind of, and again, it's the buzz right now. It is still picking up some momentum. People and organizations are working to understand it because, again, with the nature of agentic AI, as I was describing, you give it an objective and say, go. And a lot of organizations still have to be comfortable about that. There's a lot of information that still might not be correct that it goes ahead and produces for you. And that's where there's a lot of human validation at this stage that is required. But I really predict that we are going to get better at this over time through a few different means. One, putting a governance model in place, to an effort to really have that trustworthy AI, and so you don't have biases, you have explainability, you have fairness and transparency. Those are definitely principles that have to be embedded in organizations in order to enable generative AI and, more importantly, moving forward in a more autonomous fashion, agentic AI. And what I see from a market research standpoint, a lot of your segmentation analyses, again, that are done manually, these more sophisticated analyses, you'll be start to do that more in an automated fashion because these types of newer pieces of AI are going to allow you to do that. But again, this is a progression over time, and let's see how fast we move because it will move at the pace of where technology moves, as well as also organizations really going ahead and getting a great governance process in place where there'll be more comfort in terms of being producing information with generative AI as well as agentic AI.
We were talking about the right information and insights. Like, how do you ensure that AI generated recommendations are grounded in reality? Like, where do you draw a line between the trusting the AI and leaning on human expertise?
So there are a few different factors I look at in order to really help validate that. The first one is understanding where's the data pulled from or your knowledge base. So if let's just take an example here. If I'm trying to analyze something for a different oncology tumor and I'm looking at non-small cell lung cancer, but all of my information that I have in my data is for acute myeloid leukemia, that's not going to give me probably the optimal answers that I go ahead and produce here. So first and foremost, understand your knowledge base and what you're training your data on. The second one is understanding which large language model you're using and what it has been sort of trained on. Because these large language models, Some of them have been catered toward more domain types versus others. And understanding what specific domain types and where it's been trained is very important to give you sort of the context of what types of answers you might be able to expect. And then finally, what sort of prompting has been done in order to kind of lead you down that trail? As you're well appraised and aware, these models, when you give it a prompt, you're actually giving it new information into the model that you're producing to give it a little bit more training. So, for those of you that have had the opportunity to go ahead and interact with large language models, which I believe is a good portion of the audience here, what happens is when you write a query and you ask any type of large language model a certain piece of information, it builds on that rather than having to write further queries to explain what you just wrote before. So it keeps on building and compounding on it. So understanding that stream of sort of, lack of a better term, logic of what you have gone ahead and prompted to see what type of answer that has given. So those are three important things in effort to really validate what sort of insight is coming out from your large language model, or even other models, such as your small language models. So any language model out there.
So let's talk about the consultant of tomorrow. As generative and agentic AI continues to evolve, how do you see the role of consultants changing? Are we looking at future of AI curators and interpreters, or something even more transformative?
So one of the things that is going to be very important here is how fast is technology evolving here. If we really think about it, when we look at our large language models, what generally has been happening is to answer some of your more complex objectives or use cases, it takes a lot of computational power. And that's where a lot of organizations say, well, it's going to cost me a lot of money and it takes a lot of computational time and effort to do that. But now you have these models that are coming in place like DeepSeek. What happens here differently is what I'll call a traditional large language model. You go ahead and put in a prompt and you start asking it to process for you. The whole set of variables and the whole model runs. But what you have with something like DeepSeek is you have something on top like an orchestrator. And what that does is it goes ahead and takes in your prompt and it serves like a router to say, what part of my model and set of variables do I need to go ahead and run? So instead of running a huge large language model, I only run that portion of the model that goes ahead and is pertinent to the prompt that I'm asking it to do. So from a time perspective, a computational perspective, and a cost perspective, that's a lot much cheaper and more efficient that you're having it do. And in addition to that, what's also happening is specific domains, you're starting to have small language models, where it's a very highly concentrated area that you go ahead and have the model trained on, and that knowledge base, again, that set of information is very domain specific. So to run these models again are going to be much more efficient and cheaper in cost because you're really limiting it to the set of information that you want it to go ahead and analyze for you. And this is going to only get better as, again, what we have seen over time in just these short 2.5 years, you've seen sort of the progressions and evolution of how technology and these models have progressed. And that's going to only just intensify here. So this is where I see consultants, again, going ahead and saying, I can start to ask much more complex sort of questions against objectives or use cases. And this is where, again, consultants will be elevating their activity to much more strategically oriented sort of activities versus doing a lot of the manual work and running the physical models and going ahead and choosing what are the variables, what are the parameters that I need to include in there. And it's going to be going from that to more of validating and ensuring that the information that's coming out of there makes sense. And again, it follows a lot of the principles that I have alluded to: traceability, explainability, fairness, no bias. So those are the things that we need to make sure that is in place in effort to capitalize on all of this.
Right. And what's your message to the companies still on the fence about integrating AI into the research or consulting workflows, and what long term value should be thinking about?
Well, what I would say to those companies that are on the fence, the more competitive the companies and the ones that are demonstrating value are the ones that are using and leveraging AI. You'll see that very clearly by one, they're getting insights to their clients a lot faster than the companies that are not leveraging that. And it's all about being competitive in this marketplace and saying, how can I go ahead and accelerate the speed to insight and getting that insight so I can go ahead and action and make decisions on that. So just for example, I can do a lot of analyses leading up to a certain conference within a disease area in life sciences. So let's just take again for oncology. ASCO is a big conference, and there's a lot of people that are putting out position papers, research studies, and analyzing that information on different platforms out there, such as X. What type of data is coming out and what are people's feelings about it. You can go ahead and basically, as a life sciences or pharmaceutical company, analyze that information quickly, figure out what changes do you have to make in your promotional type of approaches based on the information and the analysis that you just did in a rapid fashion, and go ahead and act on it to move quickly in the marketplace. Using traditional techniques, you'd have to do a lot of NLP analysis in the background, and a lot of that will take if you do that manually, it'll take weeks to do. But a lot of the movement in this market happened literally days after conferences as these, because people are interested to know people's positions and viewpoints on how this certain piece of data, the treatment paradigms in that therapeutic area or tumor type.
So, talking about the future outlook based on this, what's the biggest opportunity you see for generative as well as AI in market research and consulting over the next 5 to 10 years? Are there any emerging tools or trends you're particularly excited about?
So I think the biggest opportunity is getting real-time insights. And I know that we are a ways away before we get there, and we got to graduate or progress to get there. But let's just be a little provocative for a moment here. Let's think about it. If we could get in the life sciences space real-time sort of insights on how patients are consuming different therapies. So that is, again, having some direct data feeds from pharmacies where all of that information is literally disseminated in a real-time fashion. And a lot of the principles that I mentioned earlier, if having a great AI governance process in place, making sure you understand what data is coming in, and what's important is the quality of that data. This is where your data quality, your stewardship processes are very important. What sort of tools and technologies are you using to analyze that? How are your models trained in order to go ahead and take in that information? And what type of insights is it producing, either in a reactive fashion when you prompt it through generative AI, or in a more proactive fashion when you use something as agentic AI? So those are things that are going to come into place. And I think the technologies are going to be the key part, as I was just mentioning a moment ago. How quickly can you help people progress through all of these stages that I just mentioned under a AI governance framework that you establish, so it is, again, trustworthy, it's fair, there are no biases, it's traceable and explainable. You want to have all those concepts in place to ensure that the information that's being, again, disseminated follows those principles.
So I know we're a bit short of a time, but a wonderful discussion so far, and I hope this will help a lot of startups and small, medium-sized businesses, companies out there, specifically in the healthcare and consulting, trying to adapt with generative AI and agentic AI. I would love to have Gautham, for a few more minutes. But thank you so much, Gautham, for having with us and sharing your insights on how the latest trends are, shaping the market research consulting.
Thank you so much, Amr, for having me. At the end of the day, what I love to serve for many out there is hopefully as an ambassador for analytics and AI in terms of market research and consulting. I'm a true believer in this area. And one thing is this is, again, one of the most exciting times out there. And I'm sure, as I was mentioning, there's a lot of different developments that are happening so rapidly. So look forward in the future to talking to you about those developments.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Gautham. All the best and take care of yourself.